Hi, and welcome to EDSC 551, Legal and Ethical Issues. This is week 4. So this is the instructor video for week 4. This week, we'll be talking about child abuse and individual and group counseling, the legal and ethical circumstances that surround those areas. Also, I'd like to highlight that you have 2 videos this week, recognizing signs and symptoms, and then child abuse prevention, how to make a report. And I'll be talking a little bit more in detail about that. This week, the only assignment that you have due is your week 4 discussion board, okay? So I'll be talking about going over this week a couple of the chapters. Let me begin by opening up the PowerPoint. Okay, so this week we'll be talking about child abuse and individual and group counseling. So what is abuse? Okay, abuse may take on different forms. It can be physical, neglect, sexual, or emotional abuse. Oftentimes, these types of abuse occur in combination with one another, and children who are physically or sexually abused often face emotional abuse and or neglect at the same time. So individuals who are working to plan, who are working or plan to work with schools should be prepared to recognize the signs and symptoms of child abuse and neglect. And the presence of just one of these signs is not typically indicative of child maltreatment. So the book goes over some specific signs, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit. I'm going to come back to this PowerPoint, but I'm going to share a different device with you. One of our trainings that we use, and I want to share that with you now. So school counselors have the job at Hawthorne School District of providing this mandated child abuse training. So we have to familiarize ourselves with the policy and procedure of the mandated reporters. And I think that most of us know this, and most of you guys are in education. So I'm just gonna kind of go over, this was in 2015, which was the last change to the mandated reporters. And they included additional information and additional job titles in as a mandated reporter. So I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the things. Here's a quick view of who are some of the people that are listed as mandated reporters. It is an extensive list, and this list is not complete. In 2015, they added athletic coaches, athletic administrators, athletic directors employed by a public or private school that provides a combination of instruction for kinder or grades 1 through 12. Any athletic coach, assistant coach, graduate assistant involving in coaching at a public or private post-secondary institution, commercial computer technicians, commercial photographer, processors, or computer-generated image processors. So that was in 2015 when the law changed, okay? So again, some of these statistics are kind of old, but about in 2013, 89% of all reports were made in the state of California were made by mandated reporters, led by educators who made 22%, who suspected child abuse or neglect. And so we are the number ones. So the updates to the law was because more staff are required to have training. They need to cover the signs and indicators of abuse, cover how to make a report, Stepping employees through this new process is important because it's a legal issue, and it was important for employees to have different access to students, and students have different expectations of adults. So that was the landmark case that started Mary Ellen Wilson, that started the first abuse reporting laws, and how we got to this point. So in 1963, California enacted abuse reporting law. Then the child abuse and neglect reporting law was passed in 1980, and it continues to create definitions and procedures regarding suspected abuse and protections. The most important thing is just informing all teachers and yourself, just keeping yourself aware. If you see a mark or something, it's better to call it in to Department of Children and Family Services and let them sort out the details. You just don't want that mark to be ignored, and it was something that was maybe the beginning, middle, ongoing situation that is occurring in the household. And you don't want to have knowledge that you saw the mark, took pictures of the mark, but you didn't follow through with anything. And that goes for any conversation, verbal information that you receive, it's all the same. So this goes over the definitions of different abuse and the details of it, and then just what are some signs and symptoms, all right? So here's for physical abuse. If the child seems frightened of the parent and protests and cries when it's time to go home, shrinks at the approach of adults, or reports injury by a parent or another adult caregiver. So these are not comprehensive naturally. These are just thoughts that should, as you see or hear things, these are things to think about. But I mean, in today's society, so much is going on. It's important to make sure that you ask multiple questions, multiple times in different ways to get the same answer. So it's important. With parents and caregivers, if you hear parents and caregivers offering conflicting or unconvincing no explanation for the child's injury, describing the child as evil or negative, using harsh discipline with them, those are signs to be concerned, all right? Remember, you wanna keep in consideration the developmental abilities of children when you're evaluating their injuries. So like the youngest ones in my area are the ones that in elementary that tend to have, you have to really take a look at those students because oftentimes they cannot fend for themselves. So you want to make sure that you are addressing all the needs, all right? So you want to look at where the bruise came from, where the scratch came. So does it seem reasonable? Like if I say I was riding my bike and I fell and the side of my leg is scraped, that's reasonable because I could have fallen to the left or to the right. If I hit a bump and I went forward and hit my head, is that reasonable? Very reasonable because I could have hit a bump, went over the handlebars, depending on my weight and whatnot, and depending on the size of the bump. So then that's where the head injury may have come from, you know, upon riding a bike, okay? But we want to make sure, like if it's in the inner thigh or something, that someone isn't doing something to someone else, you know? So some red flags for possible physical abuse include injuries that are unusual for a child's age, history or previous recent reoccurrent injuries. The parent or caregiver delays or fails to seek medical attention for the child's injury, and a statement by the child that the injury was caused by abuse, all right? So sexual abuse, the definition is consists of numerous acts over a long period of time or a single incident is also sexual abuse. They can be victimized from infancy through adolescence. It includes rape, incest, sodomy, fondling, exposure of oneself, oral copulation, penetration of the genitals or anal openings. Those are all important things. Child pornography is also something that's important. And that is because many times the student feels as though they're not able to, they tell them not to share information. So some signs, some possible signs: difficulty walking, student refuses to change in the gym, demonstrates bizarre, sophisticated, or unusual knowledge of sex, extreme secrecy, compliance or withdrawal, sexual play with peers that goes beyond curiosity, very seductive behavior, runs away or reports sexual abuse by the parent or another caregiver, becomes a parent pregnant, or contracts a venereal disease. So if you need to make a report, some questions that you could ask yourself: has a student had sexual contact with another person? Has a student been exploited sexually in a way? And has a student been exposed to sexual content? So neglect. So this is the one that we spend most of the time reporting. It occurs when an adult responsible for the well-being of the child fails to provide for or protect the child. And neglect may include not giving food, clothing, shelter, failing to keep the children clean, lack of supervision, and withholding medical care. So some things to look for: frequently absent from school, begs for food or hoarding, steals food for money from classmates, lacks needs, medical, dental, immunization, or glasses, poor hygiene, the odor of urine, feces, very bad breath, dirty, decaying teeth, consistently dirty and has severe body odor, regularly or frequently soiled clothes, listless, fatigued, suffering sufficient clothing for the weather, lacks that thereof, poor relationships, withdrawals from others, craving attention, low self-esteem. If the parent seems or appears to be indifferent to the child, this could be a warning sign. Seems apathetic or depressed, behaves irrationally or in bizarre manners, or is abusing alcohol. So when you're looking at neglect, you're looking at how many warning signs do you see? Are the warning signs regular or frequent? Could the student's physical health be seriously endangered? So emotional abuse: any chronic or persistent acts by an adult that endangers the mental health or emotional development of a child, including rejecting, ignoring, terrorizing, corrupting, constantly criticizing, making mean remarks, insulting, giving little or no love, guidance, or support. So here's some signs: shows extreme behaviors such as overtly compliant or demanding behavior, extreme passivity or aggression, severe anxiety or depression, withdrawals of or aggressive behavior, and is either inappropriately an adult or inappropriately infantile, substantially changes in the child's behavior, emotional response, or thinking that is not normal for the child's age or development. So some signs: crying without apparent cause, feeling or having little self-worth, withdrawal from learning, difficulty concentrating on learning new material, a drop in school performance, sudden lack of participation in school activity, frequent headaches and stomach aches, unexplained weight loss or gain, self-destruction, self-injury, such as cutting, reporting sleeping problems, nightmares, attempting to run away from home, abuse of drugs or alcohol, attempting suicide or talk thereof. So some signs to look out for: the parent constantly blames, belittles, or berates the child, is unconcerned about the child and refuses to consider offers of help for this child's school problem, or overtly rejects the child. Okay, some questions: does the student demonstrate severe anxiety, depression, withdrawals, or aggressive behavior? And has the parent obtained treatment for the child or tried some other way to improve the child's symptoms? All right, so when we talk about making a report, it's important that we do make the report and the timeline. Here is the section of the law that requires us as mandated reporters to ensure that we do it. Each school district has different policies and procedures, but the federal law states that the person who hears the information first is the person who should report it. Now, there's nothing wrong with having someone speak to the child secondly to see if the child repeats the information, but it is important for it. Now, they say if two mandated reporters hear it, whether it's first or second, an example of that would be the teacher hears it first and shares it with the school counselor. The school counselor interviews the child and then hears the same exact information, okay, and hears and feels as though the report should be made. Then the report should be made. And more than likely, the school counselor should make the report. However, if the child reported the information and to the teacher, and then upon reporting the information to the school counselor or a second mandated reporter, the information is conflicting, that is when the first person needs to go ahead and utilize the information that was given to them, unless the child specifically says that he or she lied to the teacher. And then when they say they lied, you kind of want to, go into more detail about that, asking more questions. Well, why the lying? And seeing if you think they're lying for cover up, or are they lying because they just weren't honest the first time? So these are things to definitely look out for. So we kind of want to go into the timelines for reporting. One thing that has been stated over time is may reports be made anonymously, meaning I don't want to reveal my name. That is not okay. As mandated reporters, we are not allowed to report anonymously. We must give our full name in order to make the report. It's deciding when to report. Responsibility for reporting rests solely on the mandated reporter. Reporting suspected abuse to an employer, supervisor, school principal, school counselor, coworker, or other person is not a substitute for the child's protective agency. You want to keep detailed notes. You have your SCARS report, which is the blank report where you can keep down the notes. The report should be done in 36 hours, completed the written report from the time that the information was given to you, and that it's not your job to investigate. You are the reporter. So if you have doubts about it, if you have family, if you know the family, if you don't know all the details, that's not your job. Your job is just to report. We report first by phone using the 800 number, and then we do the written report within 36 hours to the Child Protective Agency, okay? And there's been several cases where school districts have been absolved of all wrongdoings in a child's death due to the fact that they did make reports. However, maybe the agency didn't follow up, maybe the agency didn't follow all their guidelines, and it led to the death of the child. And so when the parent or other family members sue, only that agency was responsible because the other agencies ensured that they made the reports, okay? So, and also recent changes to the law in January 1st, 2015, when teachers apply for initial credentialings or renewals, they'll be required to sign a statement acknowledging that they understand that their reporting duties are what their reporting duties are pursuant to the Child Abuse and Neglect Reporting Act. And educators who fail to report suspected abuse or neglect may lose their license or credential. Okay, so no supervisor or administrator may impede or inhibit a report or a subject, subject the reporter person to any sanctions. So if I disagree but the information wasn't given to me as a school counselor, it was given to the teacher, I cannot stop him or her from making the report. I encourage them wholeheartedly to go ahead and make the report. Let the agency take care and do their due diligence and share the appropriate information, okay? So there are fines punishable, and we do have immunity. And when we fail to report, those are our punishable crimes. And then there's lots of obstacles that'll come in our way, and we start to think about, well, what if this, what if that? But the important information to remember is that it's not our job to determine or investigate. It's just our job to report the information that we heard and make sure that we report it. Another important thing is reporting your colleagues. If you hear about them having an inappropriate relationship with anyone on the campus, students or otherwise, it's important to be sure to report your colleagues as well. Because many of us say, oh, John would never do that. I thought he was just kidding. I thought he was making a joke. It's important to report that as well. All right. Okay. Now back to our PowerPoint. So that pretty much covers all of the information in, we talked about child abuse reporting and then the laws, because this is one that there are several court cases about child abuse reporting that are important for us to be aware of. Where can we make a mistake, and where have mistakes occurred as school counselors in not reporting or otherwise. Now we're going to be talking about counseling, individual and group counseling. And counselors have to initiate appropriate behavioral changes and help students to develop positive interpersonal relationships which may enforce appropriate parenting skills in the future. The school counselors recognize that individual and group counseling in schools is not therapeutic, or a clinical approach. And that when students require long-term counseling or therapy, that school counselors make referrals to appropriate agencies. However, that doesn't mean that we don't do anything. This is important because we will hold individual and group counseling sessions on a variety of topics that we are capable of administering strategies and techniques to help the child be successful in the academic environment. So when we see a student, we're looking at the RTI model, and we're seeing if we taught this, then what happens? If we taught a skill on anxiety, is the anxiety decreasing in the school setting? It may not. And therefore, that's where we would refer out and get, they would go into long-term counseling. And then we would support that long-term therapy by continually working with that student at the school and supporting the counselor outside of the school and helping them to continuously use the strategies and techniques that are taught by us as well as the outside therapist. So our job, the position statement on group counseling states that school counselors do not provide therapy or long-term counseling in schools to address psychological disorders. However, school counselors are prepared to recognize and respond to student mental health crises and needs. And school counselors address those barriers to student success by offering education, prevention, crisis, and short-term intervention, including group counseling, until the student is connected with an available community resource. And we'll continue to do that, because if the student continues to fail at the school, you have to show where you as the school counselor have referred out, collaborated with others, and then continuously support the student while in school. Okay, so this is very important because a lot of times in high school and also at the middle school level, you'll see that some of the older counselors don't do individual and group counseling, and that's a disservice to our profession. We are not looking for long-term therapy. We're looking for interventions to do short-term results. And then if we can't get the results that we need, then we do send out for additional support and refer out for long-term therapy. But we continue to support the student while in school using additional strategies. All right. So referrals, when giving a parent a list of referrals, it's important that you make a disclaimer. Your district takes care of this, but this is important because if you're working at a charter school or some other agency, you want to make sure that the disclaimer is available. This is a list of known providers of particular services. The providers on the list are from a variety of sources. The list is being provided as a courtesy for information only, and the user should understand that there's no assurance or guarantees regarding the provider on the list are being made by providing this list. And this one was taken from a school in Virginia. And they state, that the school district neither endorses, approves, nor recommends any specific provider listed below. This list is not inclusive of all community agencies, services, or organizations that provide the particular service, and the omission of any agency, service, or organization from this list does not imply disapproval. So as you can see, that's a comprehensive statement that helps us to alleviate any claims that we feel that this agency is better than the other, or this is the only group that we're working with, etc. So the book also talks about the wording clear and imminent danger, and that wording has been changed with serious and foreseeable harm. So clear and imminent danger has always been a concept that was defined by most school counselors as a broader than looming. And they were acutely aware their obligations extended beyond the minor students to the parent and guardians who have retained their right to be a guiding voice in their children's life. But serious and foreseeable harm also describes the concept used in neglect or tort law to limit the liability of parties to those acts carrying a risk of foreseeable harm, meaning reasonable person would be able to predict or expect the ultimate harmful result of his or her action. Now, this is the reasonable harm serious or foreseeable harm comes up in many of the court cases that we discuss here in the book. So this is an important concept because sometimes the parent is suing for that. And so, and that would allow for damages. Okay, also the book talked about suicide risk assessment. This is kind of really big in our school districts. So this is something that I kind of wanted to touch bases on and give you some additional support with. So school counselors may be required to use assessment or screenings to determine suicide risk, but they should advocate that they're never required to negate any level of the risk harm. As students may tell school counselors what they believe will get them out of or out from under scrutiny. School counselors also advocate that the school district has a policy whereby the guardians are always contacted and notified of anything learned through an investigation of potential suicide or with any instrument that will guide the parent in efforts to protect their children. So contacting the parent or guardian is the school counselor's primary responsibility. So we're going to come across, we're not supposed to do a full risk assessment and use a tool, but we may ask specific questions. And those questions determine whether it's low, medium, or high risk, and then the policy and procedures, all right? So when a student is suicidal and in crisis in a school, the school counselor's primary role is to keep the student safe and until the student can be transferred to the parent or the guardian. And before releasing the student to the parent or the guardian, the school counselor needs to, they need to be clear with the parent about what is known regarding the student's suicide ideation, all right? And they do not negate the risk of harm based on the student's self-report. And that we should avoid using any words or phrases such as impulse control or low risk in effort to soften the message. When we're contacting the parent for this, we want them to think that every time is high risk because we don't want to release them back to their parents and then their parents don't take it seriously. We want to strongly encourage the parent guardian to seek medical or mental health provider for a comprehensive assessment of their child. And then we need to help the family find resources. So this is very important. So the instructions, you should not do this ever alone, whether it's with multiple other counselors, a psychologist, a school nurse, all of these people have been trained in this suicide assessment. And the people on the crisis team should be getting annual training to make sure that they are following the policy and procedure. So the first step for the team, supervise the student and assign a designated reporter. In our school district, the designated reporter is the principal or the administrative designee. Ideally, the chain of supervision begins with the perceptive trained gatekeeper who escorts the student directly to the attention of the school crisis team member who serves as the designated reporter. This is typically the school psychologist, counselor, social worker, or nurse who's been trained to conduct suicide risk assessment. Under no circumstances should the student be allowed to leave school, be alone, even in the restroom, until the risk assessment has been complete and the plan has been generated. It may be appropriate to solicit the aid of collaborators to monitor the children while the crisis team member seeks a phone in private. So this is important. So, once it happens, you're going to go to the school counselor or the school psychologist, then the risk assessment begins. But also your administrator or designee should be present so that while you are doing all of the talking, they are doing all of the listening and the reporting. Number 2, collaborate with administration or crisis team personnel. And this could be hard. Like a lot of times when 16 things are going on in the school and you need to pull like 3 or 4 of the school employees to handle this one situation, sometimes we get lackadaisical and this could cause us problems. So it's important that we follow all of our policy and procedures as the crisis team. Number 3, warn parents or protective services, whether the child or adolescent is assessed to be low, moderate, or high risk. Parents and protective services must be notified in a timely fashion by the designated reporter. Number 4, provide resources to the parent. Don't just have them go home with them and they don't have any contact in the event of an emergency in the home. And then 5, utilize law enforcement when appropriate, and that all school crisis teams should include a representative from the local law enforcement. Now that's optimal. It's not always possible, but we should know who that individual is, who we can contact and in a flash if we need to, and that person would be able to help us with the 72-hour hold. We also have the psychological assessment team, and those have been put back in the Los Angeles County area. I'm not sure about other areas if they still, but in the past, when there was no funding for this, our law enforcement agency was our number 1 point person for that. Okay, so when we're assessing the risk, we're asking these questions. Have you thought about suicide? If there were thoughts or threats alone, whether direct or indirect, it may indicate low risk. Have you tried to hurt yourself before? Previous attempts or repetitive self-injury indicates a moderate risk. Do you have a plan to harm yourself now? This is the more involved the plan, the greater the risk. What methods are you planning to use, and do you have access to these means? These questions would indicate high risk. And these are the things that we report back to the parents, okay? If it's not accurate, or the parent says it's not true, we just want to inform the parent that this is what the student stated. It's their job to go into their home and inform and review their home to see if that's true or not. So questions to ask the parents, the teachers, or other staff members. What were the warning signs that initiated the referral? How has the student demonstrated abrupt changes in behavior? What is the support system surrounding the child? The more the student feels isolated and alone, the greater the risk. Is there a history of mental health, illness, depression, alcohol, substance abuse, conduct, or anxiety disorder, comorbidity? And is there a history of recent loss, trauma, or victimization? So here's some indicators, the low risk indicators. Sample question, have you ever thought of about suicide, harming yourself? Current or recent thoughts, signs of depression, direct or indirect threats, including social media, sudden changes to personality, friends, and behavior, evidence of self-harm in art or writing or work, dark internet websites and chats. Actions, reassure and supervise the student, warn the parent, assist in connecting with the school and community resources, suicide-proof environments, mobilize a support system, develop a safety plan that identifies caring adults, appropriate communication and coping skills and resource numbers, and document all actions. Okay, for the moderate risk, some sample questions. Have you ever tried to kill or hurt yourself before? Other indicators, previous suicide attempts, recent mental health hospitalizations, recent traumas, loss, and victimizations, recent medications for mood disorder, alcohol, substance abuse addiction, running into traffic or jumping from high places, or repetitive self-injury. The actions are seen as high risk if they do the actions, all right? And you need to document all of it. With high risk, do you have a plan to kill or harm yourself today? Are there other indicators, current plans with methods and access to means, finalizing arrangements, giving away prized possessions, or written or email goodbye notes, refusal to agree to a safety plan? Some action, supervise the students at all times, including the restrooms. Notify and hand off student only to law enforcement, psychiatric mobile responder, parent or guardian who commits to seeking immediate mental health assessment. And you can use a police escort for that. Document all actions, prepare a safety and support plan, prepare a re-entry plan, and all students returning from mental health hospitalization should have a re-entry meeting for parents, school, and community mental health personnel. Make appropriate follow-up plans, all right? That right there is a LACO preventive educators, administrators intervention, and it's the information that I just left with you, okay? So these are important topics that came up in chapters on individual and group counseling, as well as child abuse, right? So this covers our material for week 4, and we've gone over that. You just have your discussion board for this week. All right, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you in class week 5.